We can still skip it and accomplish our mission. I mean, this isn't our mission, right, sir?
Oh, that's what you want to do, Malish? You just want to leave it here so they can ambush the next company that comes along?
No, sir, that's not what I'm saying.
There's a brief firefight in Saving Private Ryan, where our characters assault a lone machine gun nest on the way to their larger objective of searching for Private Ryan. While it's a quick sequence, often overshadowed by the film's larger battles, the moments before and after the assault have always stayed with me. As I've grown older and revisited the film, I've come to understand why this sequence is so powerful. Before and after this assault, Captain Miller, played by Tom Hanks, is tasked with making two decisions that ripple through the narrative in tragic ways. His first decision, to assault the machine gun nest, is a moral judgment driven by the responsibility to protect future Allied soldiers who could possibly be ambushed by it. The assault results in the death of one of his men, Medic Wade. Soon after, he makes the equally moral choice to release the German soldier they captured during the assault, only for that very soldier to reappear later and ultimately kill Miller during the film's climactic battle. These moments beg the question, were Captain Miller's moral decisions the right ones? In today's video, I want to explore these pivotal moments and how Spielberg uses visual storytelling to illustrate the weight of Miller's choices. By breaking down the framing, blocking, and other filmmaking techniques, we'll see how Spielberg's visual choices not only guide the audience through the emotional and narrative beats with clarity, but also amplify the rising tension among the soldiers. What you just watched at the start of this video was the before moment, where for the first time in the film, after following these characters for over an hour, we witness the men openly objecting to their captain's decision. I mean, the opening shot of this sequence alone is rich with meaning. The framing alone could hang in a museum. The composition is stunning, with the men arranged in a circular formation that symbolizes collective unity, yet that unity is fractured by their captain, the very person they're about to challenge. Anyway, I digress. We will break down this scene and the one after the assault, but for those who haven't seen the film, let's first give a bit of context. Saving Private Ryan follows Captain Miller and his squad of 8 men on a perilous mission during World War II to find and bring home Private James Ryan, a paratrooper whose 3 brothers have been killed in action, and who has gotten a ticket home as a result of it. By the time the squad reaches the machine gun nest assault, they've already lost one of their men, Private Capazzo, who was killed in a sniper standoff. However, things are starting to look up, as a paratrooper they encounter has provided valuable information, directing them to Private Ryan's location. With this newfound hope, they press on, and this is where we find them as they prepare to assault the machine gun nest. As I mentioned, the opening shot of this scene is rich with meaning. Beyond the obvious staging of the man physically opposite Miller, a telling arrangement that reflects their reluctance to his orders, the background features a vibrant open field with grazing cows. This serene, almost idyllic atmosphere contrasts sharply with the gravity of the soldiers' discussion, further emphasizing the tension and the moral weight of the moment. The first soldier to have an opinion on the matter is Private Reiben, who suggests they simply go around the machine gun nest. His coverage during this scene is framed with a Dutch angle, with Captain Miller in the foreground. Dutch angles are often used to convey unease, conflict, or instability, and its use here is both understated and effective. Reiben's suggestion directly challenges Miller's authority, disrupting the unity of the squad, and this tension is visually enforced by the tilted framing. Having Miller in the foreground emphasizes the power dynamic at play. Reiben is not just voicing an opinion, he's questioning Miller's leadership. The shot also seems to foreshadow Medic Wade's death, as Wade is framed within the same Dutch angle, subtly tying his fate to this moment of objection. If they did in fact go around like Reiben suggested, he wouldn't have ended up dying during the assault. Spielberg's deliberate choice to use a Dutch angle here, and only here, makes it all the more significant. Considering this entire sequence revolves around Miller's moral burden, Wade's death, and Reiben's defiance, this single shot foreshadows the emotional toll yet to come. It's a lot to unpack in one shot, I know, but the weight of this visual choice speaks volumes about the careful craftsmanship behind the scene. What's even more telling is the shot that follows the Dutch angle. Captain Miller is physically confined within the frame, flanked on both sides by his men. This composition visually reinforces that while he's their leader, he's isolated in his decision and is beginning to feel the mounting pressure from his squad. When Private Jackson agrees with Reiben's suggestion to bypass the machine gun nest, Spielberg covers his dialogue with a shot that includes 3 other soldiers in the frame. This visual choice highlights the growing collective sentiment among the men, contrasting sharply with Miller's solitude. The first close-up of the scene is on Private Mellish, who also agrees that they should bypass the machine gun nest. The close-up emphasizes his line.
No, sir, that's not what I'm saying. I'm simply saying it seems like an unnecessary risk.
This moment is crucial as it underscores and foreshadows the consequences that will come from carrying out the assault. By framing Mellish in a close-up for this dialogue, Spielberg draws the audience's attention directly to his words, as if to say, pay attention to what this character is saying. It demonstrates that through the most fundamental elements of framing and shot sizes, Spielberg is able to convey so much, hitting every beat of the scene both visually and emotionally. Captain Miller rebuts Mellish, and he too is now framed in a close-up. The tone of the moment shifts significantly, as Miller's frustration with his men's questioning becomes evident. Morally, he knows leaving the machine gun nest intact risks future ambushes on Allied soldiers, but realistically, he likely shares the same doubts as his men. Why take the risk when bypassing it could accomplish their mission just as well? Miller appears on the verge of cracking, and the tension is subtly elevated when we cut back to the Dutch angle of Reiben, who adds,
I don't have a good feeling about this one.
The scene then ends on the same close-up of Miller, but this time the camera dollies in as he delivers the line.
When was the last time you felt good about anything?
The slow dolly in mirrors the sensation of the mounting pressure Miller feels. Spielberg's choice to emphasize Miller's dialogue here underscores the captain's internal struggle, caught between his moral duty and the growing dissent among his squad. Again, these are all very basic filmmaking techniques, but when used effectively, they elevate what is essentially a straightforward scene of soldiers objecting their captain into something far more impactful and emotionally resonant for the narrative. The men move closer to plan the assault, and this time the visual composition shifts dramatically. Gone is the idyllic pasture from earlier. Instead, we're given a much grittier, almost unbalanced shot. This shot serves as the wide shot for this sequence, and when compared to the previous wide shot, the shift is striking. In the earlier wide shot, Captain Miller, though positioned opposite his men, was still visually united with them in the frame. There was no visual separation. Here, however, the composition changes dramatically. Miller is framed apart from his men. The profile angle adds a confrontational quality, visually reflecting the tension and isolation Miller feels, reinforcing the moral weight of his decision. There's a back and forth among the men, as they reluctantly avoid answering Miller's question about who should flank the assault.
Who's going left? Who's going left?
What stands out most in this exchange is Tom Hanks's performance. Captain Miller, while in charge and leading the plan, appears more visibly worried here than at any other point in the film. It's as if he knows the idea is flawed, but feels compelled to commit to it. The men launch their assault on the machine gun nest, but the action is viewed entirely from Private Upham's perspective. Despite just witnessing Captain Miller struggle to rally his men and give orders, the audience, like Upham, is kept at a distance, unable to engage directly with the chaos. While some might argue this choice was made for budgetary reasons, capturing most of the action from afar and relying on sound design in post, it feels far more intentional. By withholding the direct violence from the audience, Spielberg shifts the focus to the aftermath, forcing us to confront the consequences of Miller's moral decision. This restraint heightens the emotional weight of the moment, making the impact of Wade's death and Miller's choices all the more devastating. The way Upham is called up from his vantage point and the camera moves through the smoke feels deliberate, like a curtain being lifted to reveal the consequences of Miller's decision. Private Wade lying there, gravely wounded. This transition pulls the audience back into the scene, forcing us to confront the human cost of Miller's choice directly. Medic Wade's horrific death scene is, in my opinion, one of the most powerful ever committed to film. I've covered it before in a previous video, but I didn't feel I gave it the justice it deserves and have since taken it down. I plan to revisit and break down this moment later this year, doing it the in-depth analysis it truly warrants. Anyway, Medic Wade dying is the first consequence of Miller's moral choice to assault the machine gun nest. After he dies, we cut to an extreme wide shot of Reiben and Jackson taking out their anger and frustration on the German soldier who survived the assault. I've seen people argue that this extreme wide shot is to intentionally play down the beating of an unarmed enemy soldier. This could be the case, but I'd argue that having just seen one of the most horrific death scenes in any war film, this extreme wide shot gives the audience time to process what they just watched, a moment to breathe. The frame is strikingly empty, with the beating of the soldier serving as the primary focal point. This makes for a seamless transition to the next moment in the scene, the beginning of Captain Miller's second moral choice. The men prepare to execute the German soldier, but Captain Miller intervenes, saying,
Not yet! First make a mark and cover Wade's body for grave detail.
This creates a tense pause for the audience, building anticipation for what seems inevitable, the execution of a surrendered soldier. We cut to a wide shot sometime later of Miller sitting alone as he breaks into tears, the full weight of what's just happened clearly hitting him. The camera dollies forward and ends on an extreme low angle, looking up at Miller. This is clearly a very intentional and dramatic shot employed by Spielberg, and it's doing several things. We often associate low angles with authority and power in film, and here Captain Miller is undeniably an authoritative figure. However, the extreme low angle that the dolly forward ends on forces this visual language to its limit, emphasizing just how much power Miller holds over his men. Yet in this moment we see him break down and cry, a striking contrast to the angle's traditional connotations. This juxtaposition between the visual dominance of the angle and Miller's emotional vulnerability perfectly illustrates the moral burden he carries. It's a powerful way to visually convey the duality of Miller's character, both a pillar of authority and a man deeply affected by the cost of his leadership. Miller pulls himself together, walks back to the prisoner along with his men, and we watch as the prisoner begs for his life and apologizes for Wade's death. Miller yanks him out of the ditch by the collar and walks him to the path. All the men follow, ready to execute this man, except Upham, who is protesting it. We get a wide dolly shot as Miller walks the prisoner to the path, with the camera dollying right as the men follow. To me, this symbolizes all the men being yanked along with Miller's decision, whether they agree with it or not. The fact that the dolly shot ends with everyone framed perfectly in the composition just before Miller announces his decision underscores the collective weight of what's about to happen. Miller blindfolds the prisoner as the men cock their weapons, ready for execution. However, Miller ultimately decides to let the prisoner go, sparking anger among the men, with Reiben leading the protest. The coverage from this point is again straightforward, but the composition and blocking are nothing short of impeccable. The way the action seamlessly unfolds might appear effortless, but for anyone who's worked on set or directed before, it's clear just how challenging it is to achieve this level of precision in blocking and camera movement. Spielberg's mastery makes it look natural, but every element is meticulously crafted to enhance the tension and narrative flow, which allows us, the audience, to be fully invested in what's transpiring on screen. Reiben confronts Miller about letting the prisoner go.
But I guess that was the decent thing to do, huh, Captain?
This seemingly simple line is often overlooked, but carries significant weight. Reiben is subtly accusing Miller of contradicting himself. Early in the film, when Private Capazzo wanted to save the little girl, he in fact said,
Captain, the decent thing to do is to at least take her down the road to the next town.
Miller snatched her out of his arms, saying, "We're not here to do the decent thing." This line of dialogue is incredibly telling, as it highlights the contradictions in Miller's moral choices. It underscores the complexity of his leadership, how even the most resolute decisions seem to conflict with each other. The moment erupts as Reiben outright disobeys Miller's orders, declaring his intention to abandon the mission altogether. This escalates further when Sergeant Horvath, played brilliantly by Tom Sizemore, threatens to shoot Reiben, while the rest of the men chime in with their own heated opinions. Captain Miller, however, remains silent throughout the chaos, letting the conflict unfold without intervening. His silence speaks volumes, reflecting both the weight of his decisions and his growing internal struggle as the group fractures around him. The way Miller calms the situation is incredibly telling about his decision making, and in my opinion, what makes this scene so remarkable. He finally reveals to the men what he does for a living back home, a question that has been teased throughout the film, with the squad placing bets on his profession. The answer is so ordinary, so unassuming, that it completely disarms the men, silencing the argument and diffusing the tension entirely. It's a brilliant moment that underscores Miller's humanity and reframes how his men perceive him.
I'm a school teacher.
He tells the men this perhaps in an attempt to help them see things from his perspective. While they view him as their captain, the voice of authority, reason and logic, he reveals that he is, in reality, just a school teacher, a man who likely joined the army when the Americans started fighting. He's not a seasoned military expert or a career strategist. He's just an ordinary citizen thrust into extraordinary circumstances, doing his best to lead and survive. Tom Hanks's performance during this monologue is truly something to behold. Considering the weight of the events leading up to it, he delivers it with remarkable precision, hitting every emotional beat. His subtle gestures, like looking down or shaking his head, add layers of vulnerability, grounding his character and humanizing him in a profound way. These nuanced actions draw the entire sequence of events to a poignant and beautifully crafted close. The cherry on top of this moment is Captain Miller's final line.
Just know that every man I kill, the farther away from home I feel.
As he walks up the hill, the scene ends with him in silhouette, a deliberate choice that reduces him to a universal figure, almost archetypal, representing a larger idea. Ending the scene this way, immediately after he reveals his true identity, acts as a powerful visual metaphor. It transcends Miller as an individual, framing him as a symbol of the moral burdens carried by all soldiers. And here lies the moral conundrum I've always wrestled with when watching this film. Captain Miller's moral choices are deeply understandable, rooted in duty and humanity. Yet, on the flip side, Private Reiben, the one who vocally opposed Miller's decisions, was ultimately right. If they hadn't assaulted the machine gun nest, medical aid would have lived. And if they had executed the prisoner, he wouldn't have returned later to kill Miller. The question then becomes, who was truly right in these situations, and what is Spielberg trying to convey? Through these moral dilemmas, Spielberg seems to explore the complexities of leadership and the cost of morality in war. Perhaps he's asking whether moral decisions hold value in a world where survival often demands pragmatism, or whether the cost of doing the right thing is a burden leaders like Miller must bear, even if it results in tragedy. This very scene, along with the questions it raises, serves as a microcosm of the entire film. Saving Private Ryan is, at its core, about 8 men risking their lives on a dangerous mission to save one man, a man they don't even know. By the end, the majority of them die as a result of this seemingly moral decision. And yet, it was Reiben who earlier in the film pointed out the absurdity of the mission.
I mean, where's the sense in risking the lives of the 8 of us to save one guy?
Leaving the audience to question whether, quote unquote, the right thing was truly the right thing at all.